I wish we all paid attention to data over the past 2 decades like we should have, because then we would really be ready to launch the AI strategies and not worry about a lot of the challenges that we have today.
I mean, you guys have been in the business of scanning through and finding where sensitive data is.
There are some tools in the marketplace, quite honestly, as they scan and build these data catalogs, they actually copy the entire data set. Like, think about that at petabyte scale. One, there's a huge cost. Two, you just doubled your risk profile.
Can AI effectively solve enterprise problems, which are very high value that people are willing to pay for?
We're starting to move away from just the large language models and we're getting to small language models. We're moving away from a general purpose agent into a very specific agent. Data products is starting to become a conversation as well because of AI models becoming data products.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Data Innovators and Builders. Today, I'm speaking with Stephen Gatchell from Big ID, Vice President of Data and AI Strategy. Stephen, thank you for joining us and chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So, Stephen, you have been in the data space for quite some time. You've seen the ups and downs, the changes and the evolution. Maybe give us a little bit of a perspective in terms of what's top of mind for you, what's happening in data that's exciting.
Yeah, so look, I think over the years, I was as a practitioner of actually trying to implement data and utilizing that for things like analytics and AI strategies and so forth. A little different than AI today from a few years ago. But as I came to Big ID, I've been here the last few years, really getting the privilege of working with our customers across the board as well as our partners. Big ID really focuses across the security, the privacy, and the governance space. And so when you talk about that, you talk about data, you talk about AI assets as well, things like data products, et cetera. And so what comes to top of mind, quite honestly, is I wish we all paid attention to data over the past 2 decades like we should have, because then we would really be ready to launch the AI strategies and not worry about a lot of the challenges that we have today. And I think, quite frankly, some of the regulations that have been implemented across the world may have been, a little bit easier on us from a data perspective if we were doing the right things from the beginning. So I think two things that really come to mind is everybody wants to talk about AI in the context of modern day AI, not traditional machine learning. And I think the second is, now they're starting to pay attention to data, which in governance, and we should have been doing that all along, to be honest.
Yeah, I think everybody's talking about AI, and we will too, actually. So I would say that from what I've seen, it seems like that focus on data has increased over the past year. That conversation about enterprises adopting AI, and initially everything seemed like it'll be easy. And then, yes, we started to hit the challenge of data, and data is complex and messy in the enterprise, right? So let's dive right into that. High level, how are you seeing, AI and reading the impact and the opportunity there?
At first, I see a major change into the type of data people are paying attention to. I mean, traditionally, people would look at structured data, and they would have that as part of their business processes and their critical data path and processes and so forth. But now with the advent of AI, unstructured data is becoming the main focus. And when I talk about unstructured data, it could be as simple as a PDF or a Word document. But now we're talking about voice files, we're talking about pictures, we're talking about video, we're talking about all kinds of unstructured data. And the challenge there is the size and scope. We've heard this way back when we used to call stuff big data, right? The size and scope of the number of petabytes that people are trying to manage in order to understand what should I use in AI, what should I not use in AI, what should people have access to, and what should we block from a security perspective has now changed. And we see even companies that have had maybe some decent data governance programs now struggling because they only focus on the structured side and not the unstructured side. Major shift. I would say the second major shift I see is the type of users. So in the past, it's most often starting with technical users that kind of understood the applications and things like firewalls and other concepts like that from a security perspective. But now we have business users that are trying to adopt it. They're laying down their credit card and they're signing up for a ChatGPT or a Gemini and trying to use it in their day-to-day lives. And so it's a different profile of a user. And do they have the right knowledge and skill set to do it safely and responsibly?
Yeah, I think finally, I feel like technology is becoming the means to the end. the end user, the end application is really taking the forefront, right? And yeah, that's the business user who wants to get their job done and done more effectively, right? So maybe let's double click a little bit on some of the data challenges, right? You brought in like the fact that it was built for structure, even where people had governance was built for structure, unstructured was unserved. And perhaps maybe in context of your company, Big ID, give us a context of like, okay, what is the state for structured data? And then let's go into unstructured. I've seen some very interesting challenges there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, unstructured data, most companies have a handle on where their critical information is, where their personal information is from a regulatory, their IP. I'm not saying everybody, but most of the time. When you talk about unstructured data, they don't even know how to discover that information and build a traditional data catalog. And that's where I talk to customers on a day-to-day, right? So Big ID, basically, we connect to all different types of data sources, whether it's structured, unstructured. We now can connect to vector databases and AI models. So think about a persistent data catalog that has all those types of data put together. Understanding and classifying information, right? Identifying the personal information, the PII data, the IP data of what you actually want to pay attention to and secure. And then when you start talking about the AI realm, capabilities such as like labeling to turn on a Microsoft Copilot or utilize Google, where you can actually look at that unstructured data of a Word document, a PowerPoint, whatever the case may be, Excel spreadsheet, whatever it is, and be able to say, okay, look, there's some really important information here. And if Steven, who sits, in the product group, has access to the financial HR information, that's probably not a good thing when they're sitting there and typing in, show me everybody's salaries over the past weeks, right? And so this is a real use case, by the way. Most of the customers I talk to, they tend to turn on some of these copilots. They realize that they don't have the right structure in place to identify what things do they need to mask or tokenize or whatever, however they're going to protect that information so that the right people have access to the right data at the right time. Usually that's not in place from an end-to-end perspective. And so when you talk about data itself, I think a major change that I've seen over the past 12 to 18 months with the advent of things like generative AI, and we'll probably talk about agentic because you have to at some point, it is really the groups coming together from privacy, security, and governance, and now saying, how do we manage all of this from an end user perspective? How do we actually manage the data? Where do we even start? And I think that's where tools like Big ID come in and can be able to scan the landscape at a very high level, do some quick evaluation and say, hey, there's some really data that you want to secure over here, but these repositories over here, you don't have to worry about it because we didn't find any PI data, right? And start accelerating that discovery of where to prioritize and focus.
Okay. So it's first of all is like, let's just scan through and find out where do we have sensitive data. Now, one question I had was from a user myself, right? I mean, I see products like Glean or Google Gemini in your Drive or Microsoft Copilot. I mean, all these products are saying, hey, come chat with your data, ask questions.
Yes.
But you're saying that behind that, the data is a lot of sensitive information. It has to be carefully managed and siloed, to the right person, right use case. So how does this all piece together? Because this use case of talk to your data is just like it has so much momentum.
Yes.
People want to just move with it. And here you are like, hey, hold on, let me. So tell me about the real life situations and how that's happening.
Yes. So the horse is out of the barn, as they say. So I talk to many customers that do turn on these types of applications that you just mentioned across the board. And they literally a month later will shut them off. This is real life, right? They will allow their entire user base to use a Microsoft Copilot or a Glean. And then as they're going through it, they're realizing that their sensitive data is being exposed. Okay. So, and every customer is different, by the way. It all depends upon the risk tolerance of the customer and really, quite honestly, what industry they're in. So as we know, right? So traditionally finance and healthcare, they usually had more controls over their data because they were regulatory required to do that. And releasing your patient data or financial data of your customers is really frowned upon, and you don't want to be in the news. But with retail and some others, you'll see that their risk tolerance is a bit higher. So real life use cases, what I work with customers on a day-to-day basis is, what is that risk tolerance? Do you actually have a governance committee that cuts across security, privacy, and data that has already talked about, well, look, we've evaluated this Copilot and we want to turn it on because we believe the ROI and the efficiency rating and the end user experience of either our customers or internally to our employees exceeds the risk tolerance that we're going to see, right? And they just turn the thing on. But in real life, if you're not managing your data and you don't even know where your data is, think about the number of files that get copied across a OneDrive or whatever, right? Application, Google Drive, etc., where somebody in HR just copies it, or finance just copies a file, and then it gets copied 15 times over. And now that PI data, it's supposed to be in a secure repository, but now it's in 14 other locations. And this is the day-to-day problem we find. So duplication of data, huge issue right now. Just reducing the duplicate data is a use case we see accelerating in our marketplace for sure. If you can remove all the duplicates that has sensitive information and have your system of record, then you're reducing your risk, right? And that's security, privacy, or data risk. If you can look at the data and understand your retention policies, this is real life use cases I talk to customers every day about. Most companies have a retention policy, but they don't actually execute it. They don't actually delete data that's over 7 years old and they no longer want to keep it. They have 30, 40 years of data, literally, right? And petabytes of data. And that could be stored in anything from a mainframe all the way through modern cloud technologies. So the ability to be able to connect to these different types of data repositories, then give the customer insight to say, look, we scan this environment, Amazon S3 buckets or Azure or whatever, Microsoft Shop, whatever you're going to be able to go in and be able to prioritize and say, okay, you've got Google Drives, you've got Azure, and you've got AWS S3 buckets. You also have mainframes. You also have Salesforce, and be able to help structure, like, where do you even start? Where's my most risk? And until you do that, what you want to do is be able to take Microsoft Copilots or the Google Drive or whatever, to your point, Gemini, and point them to repositories in which you understand that there is no risk or there's an acceptable risk, one or the other. Start small. Get those end users to start using the tool and figure out how to do prompt analysis, understand what data they have access to and what data they don't, what use cases they actually want to solve. So there might be a little bit of frustration up front. So we do see that with there's companies that are more restrictive. But in the end, to me, it gets some education and some literacy to the end users. It reduces your risk. So start small. And then as you go through and you start scanning environments and you start realizing, okay, there's all public data in this repository. Let's just open it up to that. This over here, we found a bunch of stuff and we got some work to do from a security perspective of, like I mentioned, there's a million ways to secure data, whether it's masking, tokenization, et cetera. And let's not give access to the entire company. Maybe we give access to the small group over here that needs access to it, and have a methodical plan to roll it out. And you'll hear me say this 15 times probably today. Make sure that you have security, privacy, and data talking to each other. What is the right risk tolerance level? And then what is the payback and the ROI, and making sure it's worth that risk tolerance level, and then roll it out that way. Just don't flick a switch. It's not that easy.
Yeah. I think the risk of opening up too fast and then having to close back down, then go reopen, I think you make a very valid point that go through it thoughtfully, maybe business use case wise, like, hey, let's take the marketing data and make that available. And now you can ask questions of all the product features and capabilities and so on, and then go to more sensitive, right? One thing I was curious was that, you guys have been in the business of scanning through and finding where sensitive data is. And you started with structured data and you said, hey, now we support vector databases and non-structured data and all that stuff. How have the techniques maybe evolved in being able to just do that? It's a hard problem to solve, and that's too at scale. You're talking petabytes now, right?
Yes. And just to be clear, Big ID always scan both structured and unstructured. It's the marketplace that's starting to catch up and worrying about the unstructured, right?
Oh, okay.
So, the techniques some of the techniques are traditional AI, right? It's machine learning in combination with, say, regular expressions, right? Just finding patterns of data and identifying it. And then what has matured in the marketplace are the number of tools that you can utilize. So think about a classifier as you're going through and you're reading data. Years ago, people just read metadata, right? They read the tag of information, but they didn't actually read the data itself. So
Mhm.
if somebody labeled a column as customer, you're like, okay, I found PI data. Its customer name is in here. Excellent. The metadata is captured, and now we found PI data. Well, as we both know, not all databases were created equal. The way that people actually structured their databases, they didn't always use the right column names, etc. On unstructured data, file names, you can't just go by a file name. You have to actually look inside the data, whether it's structured or unstructured, and being able to actually go evaluate the data itself, either at detail level, meaning I'm going to do a full scan and really look at each column in each row of that data and then classify everything that's either in a SQL database or a structured database, or I want to scan through a document and understand what information's in there. That's a challenge. And to your point, at
Mhm.
scale, it's very time consuming and can be very costly. So you develop these other capabilities where maybe you could just do sample scanning, right? You don't have to read every single row or column. You could just kind of sample and say, "Yep, I found some stuff in here. You're good enough," and go. Or you do have what you call side scanning now, where you actually take a snapshot of the data and you can scan it offline, not in production. Or you have an assessment scan where you just go through and as soon as you find something, you just stop, right? You don't have to go through every single file in an S3 bucket. You just like, hey, these first 5 files have PI data in them. So this S3 bucket has PI data, and just stop. So there's different techniques that have come up over the years to help really accelerate that time to value from identifying where the sensitive information is and help you prioritize it. Over the past 18 months with generative AI, there's been huge advancements. Now think about, we looked at the technical metadata in the past typically. So you do look at the metadata, but you also scan the actual data itself and you combine it and you realize what information's in there. But now with the advent of generative AI, I could take things like a business glossary and I have definitions of business terms and I can import that into Big ID as an example. And then I can actually use AI to map my physical data to my business terms. Or I could actually put a column name that makes sense from a business perspective instead of the column name that says column_1, right? Because we love to do that kind of stuff. And so now with the advent of generative AI, that has really accelerated the contextual piece of the data. And as we increase and start getting into more agentic and generative AI, a semantic layer of understanding both from a technical metadata and a business metadata has to play together. And so we've seen tremendous change over the past 18 months of accelerating that automation of putting the business contextual stuff around it. So very long answer, but there's been a
Yeah.
lot of changes over the past couple of years.
No, I think that's incredible, right? And I think that brings to the point that generative AI, you're both a user of it in your own product building, but you're also an enabler of it because now you're bringing, this privacy and governance and control to generative AI, right? So I love that, like how you're creating value on both sides of it, right?
Yeah, and as a vendor, right? Every vendor has generative AI in it today, and now we're starting to have agentic AI. I think the important message there is as people start evaluating technology suites, it's got to be configurable, right?
Yeah.
Are you using an external LLM, right? Large language model that's going out and sharing your sensitive data externally, or can it connect to your internal knowledge base systems and actually create custom large language models? Or is the tool configurable, turn things on and off depending upon your security profile? And so I think what people that are listening to this as they evaluate technology tools, make sure that you understand the configurability of it, make sure that you understand what data is leaving your environment versus what data is staying inside of your environment. There's some tools in the marketplace, quite honestly, as they scan and build these data catalogs, they actually copy the entire data set. Like, think about that at petabyte scale. One, there's a huge cost. Two, you just doubled your risk profile, right? So you got to think about like how are some of these tools actually implementing the application itself, and ask those security questions, go through and take the time to understand really how is that back end being executed and can I control it?
Absolutely. I think that uh, copy of data, it has been a big problem in the enterprise, right? And you kind of like close the door in one place and it opens up in the other one. It's been hard. I mean, in our world, we see that as creating new data silos because you're constantly trying to sort of manage that. But then, and then you don't know which one is in use. It's of course a cost issue.
Yeah.
Then like you can't shut one down. Going forward from that, I think one of the things you pointed out is like, okay, you're scanning through this, you're finding the data and um, is that becoming a data product? Like how is this all getting like, what is the bounding thing around it? Because you have, large scale over there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the point that you made earlier around a business use case, it tends to be the bounding piece of it, right? You can't go through and just scan 100 terabytes of data. It's going to take you a while to figure all that stuff out and even just get internal connectivity to these systems.
And
So to
costs a
me,
lot of money.
and it costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I'll just generalize the funny story that most of my customers I talk to, they're like, yeah, we decided to consolidate all of our data on a specific platform, and then we budgeted an X number of dollars, and it's usually 2 to 3x. And they're like, after 12 months, they're like, okay, now what do we do? Now we have to increase our budget, and we want to continue to use it because there's real value there, but yet we can't really afford to go 2 or 3x. So what you bring up data product as an example, I think data products in the past, depending upon the definition, and I think some groups do a really good job. I actually was leading with the EDM Associates. If you're familiar with them, it used to be called the EDM Council. Now it's the EDM Associates, where we actually took a cross-functional industry group and said, what is a data product? Like, think about that for a second. So I'm a governance guy at heart. So my first thing is, okay, well, what do you mean by data product? You define it for me of what you mean. And we literally sat down and defined what a data product is. What are the different components and key issues of a data product? How does data relate and how does that get managed to a data product? So you brought up a great point about duplication of data and you start losing, like, what is the system of record? So we have companies now, especially with the accelerated innovation of AI, where they're building data products, their AI models, as an example, that sit inside of a customer-facing application or internally employee application, and they're not even using the system of record to train the models on, right? So you're getting the right output. So to me, as you're going through, the first step is, as we talked, understanding your data landscape in general first. Then identifying the business use case and defining what a data product is. From what constitutes a data product, meaning, do you have the right governance in place? How often does that data product get upgraded? Does it have a data owner? Do you understand what the ROI is on that data product? Because the other issue that we see is that people just continually build models. And then 6 months later, is that model actually doing what you defined it that it should be doing? If you turn that into a data product and you treat it as an asset, and a couple of years ago, we started talking about data as assets and ROI on data and all that, put it on the balance sheet. It hasn't accelerated as much as I would have liked that to, because I think once you put data as on a balance sheet and you start talking about data products, then you start measuring like a data product as an individual thing and what is the profitability of that data product. It costs you X, it's generating Y, therefore you keep that data product running, right? And so they're all related together in my eyes. It's data feeds into, we'll just take an AI model as a use case, into an AI model and trains it. That AI model is defined as a product, so it has an owner. It has a measurable ROI on it. It has ownership from the data that's being fed into that model. It understands exactly who's using that model and what the purpose of use is for it. And I use that term purpose of use very, very distinctly because that is what some of the regulations talk about. What is the purpose of use of the data and all that stuff. So I think data products is starting to become a conversation as well because of AI models becoming data products.
Yeah. Okay. That's quite interesting. Do you now do you see that also like playing a role at the inferencing time? Like, you have what data products are out there and which ones do you have access to, which ones are permitted, and where are you retrieving from, or stuff like that? Like, is it giving a framework to that part as well?
Yeah, 100%. So to me, look, a data product could be, it doesn't have to be as fancy as AI. It could be, a worksheet, right? It could be a dashboard. Those can be data products. So to me, it's all the traditional data governance stuff that we've been talking about for decades and how to
Yeah.
manage it. I would say one of the challenges I see too is people start trying to do the right things around data product, and they'll be like, okay, it needs a data owner.
Yeah.
And then my first question to the customer is, define data owner, and do they actually know what their responsibilities are? Right? Sometimes the answer is
Yeah.
like, oh no, we assigned all these data owners. And I'm like, well, how do they know what to do? Like, what does that mean? What are
Yeah.
their responsibilities? What's their accountability to that data product? So I think we're starting to see more acceptance of defining a data product. We see more acceptance of things like ownership of that data product. We still have a little ways to go to make sure that when we do this, do people actually know what that means, right?
So what would you, for the audience, give like a must-have definition of like a data product must have these elements to it?
Yeah. So data owner, 100%. Purpose of use, 100%. Measuring the cost and the return of investment on that. What is the risk tolerance profile of that model? How often is it reviewed to ensure that it meets the purpose of fit, right? And then the last thing is like, how do you manage the life cycle of that model? So just like data, what is the model life cycle? When do you know when to retire that product? When do you know when it needs to be retrained if it's an AI model as a product? When do you know that you need to cut people off from that product? Because I'll give you one very specific example of my past life, right? During the pandemic, I was in retail at the time. We had a model that predicted what pricing was across different geographical locations. That was a data product, right? It was a model that sales used around the globe and our partners. Well, when the pandemic came and we had retail stores shut down, and then all of a sudden the actual revenue jacked up from the internet versus our in stores, it changed everything. It changed the pricing of the model because if you sell online, it's cheaper than selling in a store, right? And so that whole model just changed. So if we didn't treat that as a data product to evaluate as new data comes in, you can have monitoring on outlying information. And so think about what I just said, right? We had all of this 50% coming from retail stores of sales and 50% coming from our web interface, right? Our web store. Now, all of a sudden that jumps to 95% through the web. That's going to change your model. It's going to change how that model is actually calculating the prices around the globe. And that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. And so you got to treat it as a data product. So that way, when things like that happen, mergers and acquisitions happen all the time. You start ingesting somebody else's data or a divestiture, right, of data. You got to treat these things as data products so that you have somebody monitoring and responsible as you go through these major changes and impact of how your business is changing. Tariffs globally change retail quite frequently right now. So how does that change the models that are out there in the retail space or the wholesale space? These things happen every day. And if you don't treat things as data products, then you're not going to, you could potentially lose, millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned a little bit about the semantic layer as well, right? How would you help us relate that with data products? And
Yeah. So look, I think a semantic layer comes into play. There's a few different concepts here, right? Data mesh, knowledge graphs, and I'll kind of explain how these fit together. I think as you go through and you start scanning data and you start understanding the relationship of data, correlating the data, if you will, right? And correlation of data means what relationship does one entity have from another? And an entity can be a person or a thing. So think about a person. As you're looking at where my information is across multiple databases and unstructured data, how do I relate that data across the different data sources? So that if I say I have the right to be forgotten because there's a regulation that says in California you have the right to be forgotten, a company can go in and actually delete that data. In the background of that correlation is actually a knowledge graph. And it shows how one data set is related to another data set that's related to another data set. And it actually builds kind of like this visualization. Where the semantic layer comes in is how do I define that consistently across disparate data sources? So as I build this knowledge graph out, if I'm defining what a customer is it consistent across the different data sources? Or do I have B2C customer versus business to consumer customer versus a business to business customer? Can I identify emails that are vendor emails versus employee emails versus customer emails? That's the semantic layer. So combining how you look at the business metadata to the technical metadata, like I was talking about earlier, understanding the knowledge graph and relationship of the entities in the background starts building up this semantic layer so that as you go through and you want to build an AI model, building something for the US is going to be very different than building that same model for the Middle East, right? Because you have different consumers, just picking on retail for a second. You have different regulations, and you have to understand that semantic layer to ensure one, you're separating the data, right? US versus Middle East data. That's number one. Two, you have to understand the regulations and how that data relates together. And then what do you actually have to capture for that data product to ensure that you can do it legally inside of that country or that location. And then, companies are starting to think about like data meshes was starting to become popular, right? To me, that's just
Yep.
virtualization. Maybe I'm oversimplifying
Yeah.
it, but virtualization's been around since mainframes. But anyway,
Yeah.
how do you actually utilize that data and relate it without moving the data? Right. And then again, that's where that semantic layer comes in so that if you're in Salesforce versus you're inside your financial system versus SAP, you can relate that data all together. And that's where knowledge graph comes in. That's where the semantic layer comes in. And that's where like a lot of this automation where we used to have these poor data stewards try and do this manually.
Yeah.
It's impossible. The size and scope, and it's just impossible. So I think, like I said, over the last 18 months, 24 months, with the advent of generative AI, knowledge graphs are starting to become much more popular because people are actually trying to build a semantic layer now, which is really cool. I'm very happy to see that. And that's going to help the automation of governance. That's going to help the automation of using the data in the right context with the right regulatory oversight, with the right monitoring of those environments.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you talk about the right context, I think that becomes an essential part of um, taking advantage of the language models as well, right? Can we
100%.
fetch all the relevant context or with governance, for answering a specific question or running a specific sort of agentic flow, right?
So I love that. Can I just jump in for a second? Because you bring up a brilliant point. Okay. As we go through and most people are familiar with large language models at this point if they're in tech, right? Small language models, that's starting to become more popular. So as we move into agentic AI and having agents, it becomes even more important the context of what that agent is going to do. And so what I like the trend that I see going on is we're starting to move away from just the large language models and we're getting to small language models. We're moving away from a general purpose agent into a very specific agent. And that semantic layer actually helps. So let me build a very specific CRM frontline use case agent that's just going to solve first line support tickets as an example. I'm going to build then a financial agent that is going to worry about things like accounts receivable and accounts payable and our customers and so forth, and be very specific on financial. So it could be much more accurate, lower cost, quite frankly, more contextualized, right? And then let me build a customer service agent that actually goes to the services part, not just the frontline calling thing. And those agents can then kind of work together if this right semantic layer is there and the right context is there. And so you now start having these, what I call swarm of agents, come together to solve an end-to-end business problem versus when we first started with generative AI, everything was large language models. It cost too much money for anybody to build their own large language models, which that's changed now. And we're starting to really understand the technology, quite frankly. We're starting to understand the risk associated. We're starting to understand how do we make them more accurate, less costly. And so a lot of really smart people in the industry were starting to focus on this type of stuff. So sorry to interrupt you there. I thought that was a great point.
That's a very good point. And I think one of the things here that you noted was this swarm of agents. And I think for those who are listening, it's very important to understand and maybe see that it's best when you make agents that are very tightly defined and well constrained within the task that they're supposed to do, and you increase their ability to execute reliably with that. And if I look at the number one question that is out there in the industry today, like, is there an AI boom or not? Or I think the real answer to the question is, can AI effectively solve enterprise problems, which are very high value that people are willing to pay for? And that's the question we are really working towards, right? So let me pause there and see if you have any comments on that part.
I love that.
Yeah.
That of course is the question, right?
Yeah.
Because what are we doing all this stuff for if it's not delivering value? So I would say, there's some people in the marketplace are saying there's going to be an AI bust and all this other stuff. I'm a little more optimistic than that. And I would say moving things into production is the number one problem. We see tremendous things happening in educational institutions. We see tremendous things happening inside of enterprise organizations, inside the government. Really cool stuff in the labs. But the lab does not equal production. And I think that's where the next focus has to be. It has to understand, like, if we're actually going to do POCs or whatever you're going to call them, right? Proof of value, proof of concepts, whatever you're going to call these things inside the lab, we have to have the right guardrails in place for those testing environments so that as we move to production, it's not like a reconfiguration of the entire thing that we just went through. We have to rebuild the agent because we didn't put in guardrails that follows these specific regulations, right? You have NYDSP in New York that everybody's worrying about. You've got now I forgot what the federal government is calling the data repository, right? We have to protect the data from U.S. citizens now across that. So there's all these complex things that are happening, and I see great stuff happening in the test environment, but the ROI comes when you put it in production. So to your point, I think we have to focus in on that as the next step. And if companies start thinking about, let's start very, very small. Let's do some testing and not like blank sheet of paper and North Star like things. Let's take a specific use case. Let's take it from end to end and actually implement it in production with measurable OKRs. I like OKRs, objective and key results, because they actually have objectives and key results versus KPIs are just kind of like, here's a key performance. And to be honest with you, half of them that I see don't mean anything. It doesn't tell you if you're in the right direction or not. Have OKRs associated so that as you go through this, you have an expected ROI, then you have the actual ROI. And it could actually really help with funding too, because as you're going to try and get more and more funding to pay for those cloud costs, to pay for additional technology, to actually get more resources, whatever the case may be, you can actually pay for your own department, if you will, at some point, if you treat it as a P&L. And so get it into production, stop with just the testing, deliver something end to end, measure something expected versus the actual, and start building that factory. If companies do that, we will not have an AI bust. We will continue to have the AI boom. If we just keep spending more and more money on AI because we think it's cool and we're not seeing an ROI return on it, meaning our company's profitability is not going up, whether you have direct attribution or not, right? Direct attribution would be really cool, but just have an ROI measurement. So 12 months ago, we didn't have ROI, we didn't have AI, generative AI in our product. 12 months later, we do. Great. Are we selling more? Yes or no? Right? Again, it doesn't have to be direct attribution to me. It's just like, are you going in the right direction? Are you actually getting back what you're spending? If the answer is yes, there'll be no bust.
Yeah, I think the good thing about the pace at which AI adoption is happening and innovation is happening is that we are moving at a very fast pace.
It's incredible.
Which means, look, we had a buzz in the .com era, but the time period it took from people coming up with ideas like, hey, let's have an online store, to an online store actually working was several years. So clearly the money pouring in couldn't sustain for that. But in case of AI, I do think that the pace at which things are happening are very fast. So there is quite a possibility that the investment curve and the outcome curve, like, they catch up to each other in a timely fashion. We're all optimistic and hope that happens. But one of the things that I'm seeing, at least, is that slowly production use cases have started to happen. It's very important to pick the right area where you put that effort in. The clearly areas, like customer support, for example, where they have, much better outcomes than maybe managing procurement, for example. So there are complex use cases, there are simpler use cases, right? So I think those will be interesting things. But curious if you think about someone as a company, let's say, getting into agentic AI, thinking about, bringing in like real production grade use cases, what would your guidance be for them? We talked about structured data, privacy governance. We talked about unstructured data, privacy governance. How do they really get to production in a reliable way? Because all
Yes.
these
So
privacy
first,
concerns will become really important when you
yeah,
get there, right?
100%. Because if you get fined or you have a breach and you're in the news, somebody's going to get fired, right? Oh, you
Yeah.
should get fired. So look, I think there's a bunch of steps, but I'll just kind of take you from kind of left to right as I'm thinking about this. First, you got to have a governance committee, period, end of story. It's got to be cross-functional with the right decision makers or representatives of decision makers in the room, because you need to do assessments of what your risk profile is versus what your expected ROI is versus your expense, et cetera. And you have to have a payback on that. So it all starts to me with assessments. Then you can kind of like figure out, okay, what is that business process? So this is where the differential between the lab back office and getting into production changes to me. Don't just like okay, we approve the assessment, so go off and just kind of play around. No. Design the business process to get to production as a next step. What applications need access? What's the data of those applications? What are the individuals or the agents? Because now we have to worry about not just humans, right? But we have to worry about the individual agents. What type of human in the loop are we going to have? Are we going to have human over the loop, in the loop, outside the loop? Like all these concepts, and human in the loop just means for the audience, right? Do you have human oversight of the process somehow, some way? So you have to build that production business process. Then you have to go and execute around what data you're utilizing, around what regulations you have to follow, and what guardrails you have. So a lot of people will use frameworks like a NIST or a DCAM or CDMC, those types of frameworks, to actually understand, am I in compliance with these regulations or not? So then you understand all the data that you're going to utilize to go execute that use case. You evaluate the risk through classification, labeling, and tagging. Then you actually remediate those risks before you train the model. And then you actually monitor that after on a continual basis. So you go from assessment all the way through monitoring. And if you do that, then you can start putting things into production with the right confidence level of your risk tolerance being met there.
Yeah. I think that's a good blueprint to sort of take forward and, get started. I think it's very important to demonstrate value coming out of this. And one of the things that you touched on as we were talking about this was, earlier was about how prompts and so on sort of expose new attack surfaces as well, right? I'm curious if you can share a little bit about that, especially
Sure.
as people are thinking about going to production use cases, right?
Yeah. So look, I think with the adoption of generative AI, we'll talk about that for a second. So one, you have shadow AI all over the place, and
Sure.
there's multiple pieces of that. If you're talking about just generative AI, you'll have people that are using their credit card to connect with ChatGPTs or DeepSeek or whatever the tool of choice is. And if they're not if they don't have the data literacy or the AI literacy, they may be uploading sensitive information. If you don't have the right controls in place, you're releasing sensitive information into a public marketplace. That's problem number one. If you are using, for instance, auto code generation, right? So a lot of people
Yeah.
use GitHub these days, right? Very popular. If you're not protecting that code generation and you have clear text passwords, or you have open API keys, or you have token keys, or whatever you have inside of that code repository, you may be releasing that information inside of your code that goes into a product that's released to customers, right? So you have multiple attack surfaces there where you didn't have before. And so you've got to secure those. Okay, so customers will say, okay, I'm not using a public GPT, I'm using a private GPT. That's great. There's this little thing called insider risk. Same problem. You'll have insider risk of individuals that if they don't know what they're doing, or maybe intentionally, unfortunately, they're going to take that information and that should not be released and put it inside of the model as an example, right? And you can have all kinds of issues with that. Think about if you have a breach. So even if you create and use a RAG model, retrieval augmented generation model, and you're building your own internal generative AI application, that's great. If you don't do the right security of your knowledge-based systems, of your vector databases, most companies seem to be storing their prompt and responses in some type of environment because they want to go evaluate that after the fact to retrain the model retrain individuals that might be not using the prompts correctly. You've got three attack surfaces now, right? And if you have a breach and you don't protect that data all the way through that RAG pipeline, your attack surface is increasing. And I'm getting tired of reading about breaches. It's literally every day that there's a new breach somewhere. And so I think part of that is education. We have done a better job in the industry of forcing people, and I just got mine in the email today, right, of security training. I got to go through my yearly security training. But we're not doing that for AI. We're not doing that for generative AI. We don't do that for data governance. Like, to me, we got to start doing that. So every year, release the security training. Cool, let's do that. But I want a second training. What is the new implications of AI? How do you use it safely? What are some of the new regulations? What are the implications of those new regulations? Like, it should be part of our training every year.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think those trainings are still talking about email phishing and those things, and not yet getting into all the risks that you shared that can come with AI, and also being able to have AI outcomes from AI that you can trust, and you can easily feel like you can trust whatever is coming out, back from a language model.
That's a great
that can
point.
itself be wrong. Yeah.
Great point. We haven't even talked about that, right?
We haven't talked about that.
People to make sure that they understand that the outcomes of these things can actually be incorrect, and think about making a major business decision on incorrect information. That I can't believe we haven't even talked about that yet.
I think when we started the conversation, Stephen, you said, hey, we can go 4 days talking about it. And I can't believe how fast, like 45 minutes have gone by. But it's been amazing chatting with you. I think there's so much richness of insight that you have. Maybe share with us, like, how can people follow you, and where are you sharing these insights? And we should get together again for yet another conversation. So many topics to cover.
Let's do it. I really enjoy talking about this stuff. Sometimes I might talk a little too much. You're a great interviewer, by the way. I really enjoyed our conversation today. I'm on LinkedIn, right? Stephen Gatchell or whatever on LinkedIn. Please reach out to connect. I do post. I haven't posted in a little bit, but I do have quite a few posts on absolutely data governance and AI strategies. Responsible AI. BigID.com has some of the white papers I've written. I just wrote one on classification and labeling white paper. So you'll see that on BigID.com. So feel free to reach out, and I look forward to talking to you again. It's been great.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Very insightful, a lot of learning. I'm taking notes myself, and I'm sure our audience is learning a lot in the process. So appreciate you joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.